Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Listen, the sound you hear now is soft, like a whisper against old stone. A trembling note, bronze and breathless, floating through the cool air of a Florentine night. It comes from a bell, a very small one, hung by a piece of faded red thread above the bed of a sleeping child. The bell does not ring for beauty, nor for prayer, but for fear. And the fear it wards off is older than the city itself. They call it La Campanella contro gli incubi, the bell against nightmares. It was said that if the bell moved even slightly, its soft chime could send invisible things fleeing. The night hags, the mare, those unseen creatures who pressed their weight upon sleepers, stealing their breath. In Florence, during the late 14th century, many homes kept charms and relics like this. But in this particular house, the bell had a story of its own. It hung in a narrow room at the top of a merchant's home, near the old Via del Proconsolo, not far from where the baptistry's bronze doors shone in daylight. The house smelled faintly of wax and lavender, and the mother of the child, her name was Alessandra, would often sit beside the bed, her fingers tracing the edge of the little bell as she whispered prayers. The bell was not from any church. It was cast by a metalsmith who swore he had mixed in a fragment of sacred bronze from a monastery bell that had fallen in a lightning storm. That belief, that a piece of holy metal could keep evil dreams away, was not strange in medieval Florence. The people lived close to the church, but also close to superstition. At night, the boundary between saint and spirit blurred. In the damp dark, with the wind sweeping through narrow alleys, you could almost believe that nightmares were things that walked. Some said that the nightmare, the incubo, was not just a dream but a creature, a hag or a restless soul. Physicians of the time described it differently. They said that the pressure upon the chest came from bad humors, or from lying too long after a heavy meal of wine and bread. But those who had felt it knew better. They would wake unable to breathe, unable to move, their hearts pounding like trapped birds. They would say they saw shadows crouched on their ribs, faces hidden beneath tangled hair. So, in many homes, bells were hung by the bed, sometimes of silver, sometimes of bronze. The smaller the bell, the purer its tone, they believed. Children especially were thought to be most vulnerable. If a child woke crying in the night, the mother might lift the bell and make it ring softly. Ting, 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 3 times and cross herself. The sound, gentle and thin, was meant to push back the darkness. The bell in Alessandra's house was a curious thing. It had been given to her by a friar from Santa Croce, who claimed it came from a forgotten chapel near Fiesole. He had found it buried in dust, wrapped in a strip of blue linen. Alessandra had asked him why it was hidden. He said, "Because not all charms are meant to be found." That night, as the first rain of autumn swept through Florence, Alessandra hung the bell above her son Matteo's bed. He was 7 years old, pale and restless, often waking with cries. She had seen him once at dawn, eyes open but unfocused, his lips whispering something that made her blood run cold. "She was sitting on my chest, Mama. She was so heavy, and her hair covered my face." She held him close and told him it was only a dream. But that evening, when the shadows stretched long across the city walls and the bells of the Duomo began to toll, she remembered the friar's words and tied the little bronze charm in place. The bell's first night was still. The air was heavy, the only sound the dripping of rain through the gutter. But near midnight, a faint tremor stirred the thread. The bell moved not from wind, there was none, but from something unseen. It rang once very softly, and somewhere in the dark corner of the room, the air seemed to breathe. Florence at that time was a city of contradictions. Gold and plague, devotion and fear lived side by side. The Black Death had not long passed, and many still saw signs of evil in every fever. Superstition crept into every street, every whispered prayer. Physicians carried amulets. Priests blessed herbs. Midwives tied bells to the wrists of infants to protect them from being ridden by the Mara. There were records in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze of charms purchased for exactly this purpose. Bells, crosses, bits of iron shaped like tongues. They called them campanelli di anima, soul bells. Even physicians like Taddeo Alderotti wrote that soft sound could disturb evil spirits, for they hated pure tones. The bell above Matteo's bed was one of many such beliefs turned into habit. And yet, for Alessandra, it became more than a charm. In the months that followed, she began to notice something strange. Each time the bell chimed at night, Matteo's sleep was peaceful. Each time it remained silent, he would wake trembling, eyes wide. It was as if the bell was aware, moving when danger drew near, resting when all was safe. Neighbors whispered that her bell had a spirit inside it, a guardian soul bound to bronze. Others said she should throw it in the Arno, for charms too powerful could turn against their keepers. But Alessandra did not listen. She believed that faith could live in metal, just as it lived in prayer. Still, sometimes when she was alone, she thought she heard a faint hum even when the bell was still, a vibration in the air, like the residue of its chime. And on one particular night, long after the bells of Santa Maria del Fiore had fallen silent, Alessandra woke suddenly. The room was filled with a low, steady sound. Not loud, not sharp, but continuous, like a breath held too long. The little bronze bell was trembling. She reached out to still it, but her hand froze midway. Something was sitting on the edge of the bed. She could see the shape only faintly, as if drawn in fog. The bell gave one last trembling ring, and the air went completely still. When morning came, the house smelled faintly of wax and smoke. The first light crept through the narrow shutters, tracing pale gold lines across the rough plaster wall. Alessandra had not slept. She sat by the bedside, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching the small bronze bell sway gently in the soft air. It did not ring now. It was quiet, still, innocent, as if the night had imagined everything. Matteo stirred in his sleep. His face, once pale with terror, looked peaceful. His small hands rested upon his chest, rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Alessandra reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. There was no mark, no bruise, no sign that anything had pressed upon him. And yet, she could not shake the image from her mind. The faint outline of something sitting on the bed, vanishing as the bell's sound faded into silence. She crossed herself. "San Michele, proteggilo," she whispered. Outside, the bells of the city began their morning chorus, deep and solemn, echoing from the Duomo, from Santa Croce, from the monasteries along the Arno. The Florentines rose to the rhythm of bells, their lives measured by their sound. Bells marked births, deaths, and prayers. But this one, this tiny thing above her son's bed, seemed to belong to another world entirely. By noon, Alessandra visited the workshop where the bell had been made. It was a narrow place near the Via dei Calzaiuoli, the kind of shop that smelled of metal, smoke, and oil. The bellmaker, old Signor Bartolo, was nearly blind, his fingers rough with age. When Alessandra told him about the strange sound, his lips tightened. "It moves on its own, you say," he murmured, holding the bell up to the light. The bronze caught a dull gleam, as if it absorbed rather than reflected the sun. "I remember this one. It is not like the others." He tapped the side gently with a small hammer. The bell gave a tone, soft, long, and pure. Bartolo frowned. "You see that edge there? It is uneven. Not by mistake. Whoever gave me this mold said it was cast from a bell that hung once in a monastery near Fiesole. They say that bell rang by itself when the monks prayed for souls in torment. Some believed its sound reached beyond the living world." Alessandra shivered. "And you think that's true?" The old man smiled faintly. "In Florence, Madonna, everything is true if you believe it deeply enough." She left with the bell wrapped in linen once more. The streets outside were bright and crowded, vendors shouting, carts clattering, a monk preaching in the square about sin and confession. Yet Alessandra walked as though apart from it all, the sound of that single bell note still humming somewhere inside her. That night she hung it again. Matteo slept. The wind was low and steady, carrying the faint scent of river water. For hours there was nothing. Then, sometime near midnight, the bell gave one small, trembling ring. Alessandra opened her eyes. There was no shadow now, no figure in the dark. But she felt the air press around her, like a weightless hand upon her chest. She whispered a prayer, and the bell stilled. The silence that followed was deeper than before, almost hollow. Over the next days, she began to notice a pattern. The bell rang most often during the waning moon, when nights were at their darkest. Each time it rang, Matteo slept peacefully. When it did not, he woke with frightened eyes. It was as if the child's safety depended on its fragile sound. Word of this spread quietly among the neighbors. Florence, after all, was a city where gossip moved faster than water through the Arno. Some women asked if they could borrow the bell for their own children. Others crossed themselves when they passed her door, whispering that she had invited strange forces into her home. By the third week, a friar from the Dominican convent came to see her. His name was Fra Leone, a man known for his knowledge of old folk beliefs and the boundaries between faith and superstition. He wore the black and white robes of his order, and his voice was calm when he spoke. "I hear," he said, looking at the bell, "that this little thing drives away nightmares." "It does," Alessandra replied softly. "My son has slept peacefully ever since it came." He turned the bell in his hand, studying its shape. "Do you know the story of the Mara?" he asked. She nodded. "The spirit that sits on the chest of sleepers." "Not only a spirit," he said. "Some say it is the soul of a living person, wandering while the body sleeps. A woman who dreams of another's suffering may become the Mara without knowing it. The bell, they say, frightens such souls away. But sometimes," his voice lowered, "it can also trap them." Alessandra felt a chill. "Trap them?" He placed the bell gently back on the table. "You should pray that it rings only for protection, not possession. Some bells remember too much." That night she could not sleep. The friar's words hung in her mind like smoke. Trap them. Remember too much. What could that mean? She lay beside Matteo, her eyes fixed on the faint outline of the bell above the bed. Hours passed. The moon shifted. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and fell silent. Then, without wind, without movement, the bell rang again. Did not sound like before. The tone was deeper, almost human, almost a sigh. Matteo stirred. Alessandra reached to touch him, and for the briefest moment, she felt something cold slide across her hand, like air displaced by a shape that wasn't there. The bell trembled once more and went still. The silence afterward felt alive, as though listening back. When morning came, Alessandra looked at the bell closely. For the first time, she noticed faint scratches along its edge. Tiny markings like letters worn by time. She rubbed them gently with her thumb until she could just make them out. They were in Latin. Vox quietus, custodi somnum. Voice of rest, guard the sleep. The phrase should have comforted her. Yet as she whispered it aloud, the bell gave a faint metallic hum, as if it remembered her voice. The next days passed in a strange quiet. The bronze bell hung motionless most nights, as if exhausted from its own secret work. Alessandra tried to rest, yet each time she closed her eyes, she half expected to wake with that sound again, the trembling tone that seemed to echo inside her bones. Matteo grew stronger, more cheerful. He played in the courtyard, chasing a wooden hoop and laughing in the sun, as if the dark hours had never touched him. But Alessandra could not let go of what she had seen, or rather what she felt. The invisible weight, the cold air, the faint whisper beneath the bell's ring. It haunted her. Sometimes when she passed the room in daylight, she thought she heard a faint resonance, as though the air still carried traces of the sound. She would stop, listen closely, and for a moment it was there again, a vibration too low to be real, too soft to belong to any living thing. That week, a letter arrived from the friar, Fra Leone. The script was thin, deliberate, and careful. Madonna Alessandra, I have consulted old texts from our library. One record speaks of bells cast to guard against the incubi. A certain manuscript, dated 1362, describes such a bell kept in Fiesole, said to ring when souls wandered too near the sleeping. The monks wrote that its tone would comfort the pure of heart, but torment the restless dead. If your bell came from that mold, treat it with reverence. These objects often carry more memory than metal. The letter ended with a single warning. Do not let it be silenced by fear, nor used for curiosity. It must serve rest, not hunger. Alessandra folded the letter carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it into the wooden chest beside her bed. There were many things she did not understand, but she believed one truth. The bell's sound had saved her child. Whatever spirit lingered within it, good or ill, it had answered her prayers. That night, she lit a small oil lamp and sat awake beside the bed. The room glowed with a warm flicker of flame, and the bronze surface caught the light, reflecting a pale golden hue. She whispered to it, not a prayer but gratitude. Thank you for guarding him, she said. Whatever you are, thank you. Inside the city slept. Florence at night in the 14th century was a world of hushed footsteps and distant bells. The watchman called the hours from the streets, and far away, the Arno murmured beneath the bridges. Inside time seemed suspended. The lamp burned low. The air cooled. Somewhere beyond the shutter, a faint rustle, perhaps the wind or perhaps not. Then came the sound, ting, soft like a sigh turned into metal. The bell moved just once, a small swing on its thread. Alessandra held her breath. Nothing else. Silence again. But in that silence she heard something new. A whisper, almost a murmur, low and rhythmical. It was not words at first, only the sound of breathing. Steady, heavy, too close. She looked toward Matteo. He was still deep in sleep. The sound did not come from him. Her gaze moved to the far corner of the room, where the lamplight barely reached. There, something shimmered faintly in the dimness, as though the air itself had a shape. A faint outline rising and falling, slow, deliberate. Then, like a ripple across water, it vanished. The bell stopped trembling. When dawn broke, Alessandra found Matteo awake and calm, his face bright with color. "Mama," he said softly, "I dreamed of someone ringing a bell. It was not scary. It was warm, like someone wanted to say, 'You are safe now.'" She smiled and stroked his hair. "Then sleep will be kind to you tonight too." Yet that morning she went again to the convent. She wanted answers. Fra Leone met her in the cloister garden. The air smelled of herbs and earth, and the bells of the nearby church tolled for midday. He listened without interruption as she spoke. His hands folded, eyes lowered. When she finished, he said quietly, "Do you know the story of the bell's making?" She shook her head. He sighed. "The bell you hold was one of 3, made by a brother named Pietro de Fiesole. He was a metalsmith and monk who believed sound could cleanse the soul. During the plague, he cast small bells to hang over the beds of the dying, to comfort them as they slipped between life and death. But the 3rd bell, your bell, was different. It was said to ring not for death, but for dreams. Pietro claimed he poured his own blood into the molten bronze, binding prayer to metal." Alessandra's breath caught. "You mean?" "Yes," the friar said. "He believed the bell could speak to the space between waking and sleep. Some said he went mad afterward. The bell was hidden, sealed in the monastery vault, until perhaps a friar, unknowing, brought it back to light. The garden fell silent. Only the hum of bees filled the air. Fra Leone continued, his voice gentler. "You must not fear it. Fear gives power to shadows. Let the bell ring when it must. Trust its purpose." Alessandra returned home with his words echoing in her ears. That evening, she sat at her window watching the rooftops darken. Florence glowed faintly under the moon, the red tiles gleaming silver in the light. Somewhere a church bell rang Compline, the final prayer before night. In her room, the small bronze bell hung quiet again. Matteo was already asleep, his breathing even. Alessandra sat down, the oil lamp flickering beside her, and whispered, "Ring if you must. Guard him if you can." Hours passed. The shadows deepened. The flame burned low. Then, so soft she almost didn't hear it, the bell moved. A faint chime, like the memory of a sound. But this time the air did not still. Shifted. The shadows near the wall began to thicken. Not with malice, but with something older. Something that seemed to listen, to breathe. For the first time, Alessandra felt no fear. Only wonder. She closed her eyes, and the sound of the bell lingered, deep and distant, as if echoing through the corridors of her mind. And far away, in the quiet hills above Fiesole, another bell rang once, clear, brief, and fading into night. The next morning dawned grey and still, the kind of Florentine morning when mist clings to the river and the bells sound softer than usual. The small bronze bell above Matteo's bed was motionless again, its thread glinting faintly in the half-light. Alessandra watched it for a long time, uncertain whether to be grateful or uneasy. There was something in the air that day, a hush, almost reverent. The city outside moved as always, with carts rolling and children shouting in the street, but in the little house near Via del Proconsolo, time seemed to slow. Alessandra's thoughts drifted again to the friar's story. A bell made with blood, meant for the dying, cast by a man who believed sound could touch the soul. That night, when she lit the lamp, she found herself studying the bell as though seeing it for the first time. It was simple, unadorned except for those faint Latin letters. Vox quietus, custodi somnum. She wondered if the phrase had been Pietro's own prayer. Perhaps he had meant the bell to be an act of mercy, to give comfort to those caught between worlds. As she thought this, Matteo's breathing deepened beside her. He slept easily now, untroubled by the fears that once plagued him. The sound of distant bells rolled faintly across the rooftops. 9 strokes for the 9th hour of night. Alessandra whispered a quiet Ave Maria and closed her eyes. The sound came again. A single note, soft, slow, and pure. But this time, Alessandra felt it before she heard it. It was not just sound. It was a vibration in her chest, a hum beneath her skin. The little bell swayed gently, though there was no wind. She opened her eyes. The lamplight flickered once, twice, and steadied. Nothing moved except the bell, glinting faintly. Then she heard another sound. Faint footsteps on the stairs below. Her heart tightened. The door was bolted. No one should be there. The steps came closer, slow and uneven, as if someone were walking carefully, pausing between each tread. The floorboards creaked. Matteo shifted in his sleep. The bell rang again, sharper this time, its tone trembling. Alessandra rose from her chair, every muscle tense. "Who's there?" she whispered. Silence. Then, from the shadows beyond the doorway, a low sigh. The bell rang once more. Longer now, louder, the note clear and strong enough to fill the small room. The air grew heavy, like before a storm. The flame in the oil lamp fluttered wildly, then steadied again. And the sound of the footsteps stopped. In that stillness, Alessandra felt something leave. A presence, faint but certain, fading like breath on cold glass. The bell trembled once more and was silent. She stood motionless for a long time, her pulse slowly calming, her hand pressed to her chest. Nothing more stirred. The only sound was Matteo's steady breathing. When morning came, she went once more to Fra Leone. He met her at the convent gate. His expression grave but kind. "You must understand," he said, "that our ancestors lived with such things. The night was full of fears, of things unseen. Bells, prayers, relics. They were ways of drawing a line between the living and the other world. That bell of yours may still carry the echo of its maker's purpose. It hears more than we do." Alessandra hesitated. Then why the footsteps? Who was it? The friar's gaze turned toward the hills. Perhaps not who, but what. A dream caught between the worlds, drawn to the sound. There are times, Madonna, when dreams do not belong only to those who sleep. She frowned. "You mean it came here, into my house?" He nodded slowly. "Florence is full of restless souls. those who died unconfessed, those who linger for what was left undone. The bell might draw them, out of longing not harm, to hear once more the tone that bridges silence and prayer. She lowered her eyes. And if it draws too many, then you pray louder, he said softly, and trust that the bell will choose mercy. That night, Alessandra followed his advice. She placed a small bowl of holy water beneath the bell and whispered her prayers before sleep. The air in the room felt still and cool, the faint smell of lavender drifting from the linen sheets. Matteo slept almost instantly, his head turning toward the soundless charm above. Alessandra lay beside him, awake for a long time, waiting. Hours passed. The bell did not move, but in her dreams it did. She found herself standing in a great stone hall, its walls lit by candles. Bells of all sizes hung from the ceiling, hundreds of them, swaying slightly though no wind touched them. Each gave a faint hum, a note of unbroken harmony. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood beside a glowing forge, hammering bronze. His hands were bare, his face hidden by shadow. With every strike, a new bell took shape. When he spoke, his voice sounded not through air but through the ringing itself. "Sound remembers what silence forgets," he said. "Do not fear what answers it." The next moment she was awake. Her heart pounded. The room was dark except for the fading glow of the oil lamp. The little bronze bell was still, yet its metal shimmered faintly, as though it had just been touched by heat. She whispered into the dark, "Pietro." No answer. Only the faint hum like a tone half remembered. Outside the city slept. The bells of Florence did not ring until dawn. But within that quiet hour before morning, Alessandra understood something she had not before. The bell was not only a charm against nightmares. It was a bridge, between worlds, between breath and silence, between fear and faith. And it was awake. The dawn that followed was pale and cold, the kind that made Florence look like a painting half finished in grey and silver. The streets below Alessandra's window were empty except for a milk boy and a stray dog nosing through straw. Yet inside her small room, the air still seemed alive with something invisible, an echo that lingered long after the sound itself was gone. She sat on the edge of her son's bed, the bronze bell glinting faintly above her. Matteo was still asleep, peaceful, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. The sight calmed her, though her mind was restless. She remembered the dream, the hall of bells, the faceless man, the words that had trembled through the air. Sound remembers what silence forgets. What could that mean? Her thoughts wandered through the day like ghosts. She could not shake the feeling that the bell was changing, no longer a passive charm but something aware. When she moved it slightly, it seemed to hum faintly even after her fingers left it, as though responding to her heartbeat. She would have dismissed it as imagination, but Matteo's dreams told her otherwise. That night at supper, he said something that froze her. "Mama, I think the bell talks when I'm sleeping." Alessandra paused, the spoon still in her hand. "Talks? What do you mean, amore mio?" He looked thoughtful, as children do when they try to explain something impossible. "It says my name, very softly, and then it says yours. Sometimes it says, 'Sleep now,' like a whisper. But last night it said something else." "What?" she asked quietly. Matteo frowned. "It said, 'Don't open the door.'" The spoon fell from her fingers. The sound was small, but in that silence it seemed loud. "The door," she whispered. He nodded, calm, untroubled, and began to eat again as though nothing strange had passed his lips. That evening, Alessandra checked every bolt, every window. The night outside was still and black, without a trace of wind. She sat by the fire, waiting, every creak of the house making her heart quicken. The bell did not ring that night. Not once. But sometime after midnight there was a knock. Low. 3 times. She froze. The bell was motionless. Matteo slept deeply. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. She rose and moved to the door, her feet bare against the cold floor. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. "Silence," Then a sound, soft, distant, like a sigh breathed through wood. She stepped closer, her hand on the latch. At that exact moment, the bell above Matteo's bed rang sharply. One clear, piercing tone. It echoed through the room like light through glass. Alessandra's hand stopped inches from the latch. The air seemed to shift, to thicken. The sound vibrated through her chest, through the floorboards. Then nothing. No more knocks. No sound outside. The silence that followed was so deep it hurt her ears. Slowly, she turned back to her son. The bell still swayed slightly on its thread, catching the faint light from the dying fire. She whispered a prayer and waited until morning. When she opened the door at dawn, there was nothing there. Only the imprint of 3 small marks on the wood. Dark, round, as though burned by unseen fingers. Later that day, Alessandra went again to the convent. For Leone was gone, called to Siena, one of the monks said. But another friar, older and sterner, received her instead. His name was Fra Niccolò, and when she told him about the bell and the knocking, he looked at her for a long time without speaking. Finally he said, "You must understand, Signora, that Florence has many relics, and many that pretend to be relics. Some were blessed by the church, some were not. The bell you describe," he hesitated, "it may not guard against nightmares. It may invite them." Alessandra's throat tightened. "No, protects my son. It has saved him." The friar's gaze softened. "Perhaps so, but not all things that protect are holy. In our records, there are mentions of charms that trade, one piece for another's unrest. Sometimes a spirit takes the fear from the living and carries it within itself. Such bells are not evil, but they hunger. They ring because they remember pain." She stared at him. "Then what should I do?" "Pray," he said simply. "Keep it close, but never alone. Do not let it hang in an empty room. Bells call what listens, and what listens may one day answer." She returned home shaken, clutching her rosary tight. That night, she left the door to Matteo's room open and stayed awake beside the fire, watching the glow flicker on the walls. Hours passed. Midnight came. The bell was still. And then, very faintly, it began to hum. Not ring but hum. A tone without a strike, as if it sang by itself. The sound was low, slow, pulsing. Filled the air like breath. Alessandra rose, every hair on her arm lifting. The sound grew clearer, almost melodic. Matteo stirred in his sleep and whispered something, so soft she could barely hear it. "What is it, my love?" she murmured, kneeling beside him. His eyes fluttered open. "Mama, someone singing." She held her breath. There was singing, so distant it was almost felt more than heard. Not a voice of this world, but like the echo of a voice long gone. A hymn, perhaps, or a lullaby without words. The bell swayed once. The song faded. And silence fell again, heavier than before. The next morning, Alessandra found the bowl of holy water beneath the bell had turned cloudy. A fine dust, like ash, floated on its surface. She poured it out the window, whispering a prayer, but as the water struck the street below, she thought she heard, just faintly, the same note of the bell echoing once more, as if it had followed her prayer into the world beyond. The nights in Florence grew warmer as spring deepened, and yet the fear of the hag did not fade. Maria would leave the windows open to let the soft Arno breeze pass through the linen curtains, and still Lorenzo would wake trembling, saying that something heavy had pressed upon his chest, though the bell had not rung. It disturbed her. How could a charm forged with the priest's blessing and the craftsman's care stay silent when the child's breath faltered in the dark? One afternoon, Maria sought out the priest again, Father Antonio, who sat outside the church cleaning his rosary beads. "The bell does not sound any more," she told him, her voice low. He frowned and said, "Perhaps you have stopped believing in its purpose. These things do not work for those who doubt." But she knew her faith had not waned. She could feel it in her bones, in the quiet prayers whispered into the dusk. Antonio glanced at the sky and added, almost reluctantly, "In old times, they said such bells were not merely to scare away spirits, but to remind us that sound itself is a sign of life. When a sleeper no longer stirs, the bell cannot ring. His words unsettled her. That night, as Maria sat beside Lorenzo's bed, she placed a candle beneath the bronze bell so that its glow would paint the metal in flickering orange. She watched it carefully. The air in the room was perfectly still. Not a stir from the child, not a sway in the tiny charm. Only the slow burning of wax, the faint sighs of night birds outside. When she closed her eyes for a moment, she could have sworn she heard a whisper, no louder than breath, somewhere between the bell and the boy's lips. It was not a voice of malice but something ancient, like the rustle of cloth on stone, or the creak of an old stair. She leaned closer to the bell, trembling slightly, and the bronze surface seemed to hum softly. A vibration, not quite a ring, not quite a sigh. Her heart began to beat faster. She whispered, "If you guard him, give me a sign." The air trembled. Then silence again. In the days that followed, the household's calm slowly frayed. Lorenzo began to talk in his sleep, murmuring words that sounded like another language, something that made the servants exchange uneasy glances. "It is Latin," one whispered, "but not church Latin. It is older." Maria found herself walking more often to the edge of the Arno where craftsmen sold trinkets and charms. She asked an old metalworker, Pietro, if he knew of such bells. He nodded. "Ah yes, the bells of the midnight watchers," he said. "They were once common, hung over cradles, tied to doorframes. It is said that they echo the rhythm of the heart, keeping evil from lingering too long in silence." She asked him, "But if the bell stops?" Pietro shrugged. "Then something greater has taken the silence for itself." He told her of a case many years ago, of a family near Siena who kept such a bell. They claimed it rang without wind whenever death drew near. "It is not just the hags," he said, "but what follows them. The bell warns the living as much as it drives away the dark." Maria carried this thought home, her steps slower than before. That night, she noticed the bell gleamed differently under the candlelight. There was a faint greenish hue near its rim, a patina that hadn't been there before. She traced it with her finger and found the surface strangely warm. Lorenzo slept peacefully that night. The moon was full, the light soft through the thin curtains. Yet Maria did not rest. She listened, every heartbeat matching the stillness. The air in Florence outside was quiet save for the distant laughter of young men returning from the taverns and the slow creak of carts on cobbled streets. She began to think the priest was right. That belief alone kept the charm alive. Then just past midnight she heard it. Single chime. Soft, pure, like a thread of silver through the dark. The bell moved slightly, though there was no wind. Maria sat upright, breath caught in her throat. She turned toward Lorenzo. His face calm, eyes closed, chest rising steadily. Nothing out of place. The air was cool but still. She whispered, "Is someone here?" The candle flickered once, twice, then steadied. The bell stilled. She felt foolish for speaking to empty air. And yet the sound lingered, not in the room but in her own mind, vibrating like a memory too delicate to touch. The next morning she visited her neighbor, a midwife named Lucia, who was known for keeping charms of her own. Tiny bones wrapped in red thread, bits of saint's cloth, pressed herbs. Lucia listened quietly as Maria told her about the ringing. Then she said, "You are fortunate it rang. Sometimes, the bell does not sound until the soul has already gone." Maria stared at her, unable to speak. Lucia went on, "They say these bells carry both sound and silence together. The sound drives the darkness away, but the silence holds what it tried to take." That afternoon, Maria returned home and knelt by her son's bed. She studied the bell again. The delicate curve, the way it caught light even when there was none. The patina now spread further along the edge, like something blooming. She realized with a chill that the mark looked almost like a small handprint. That night she could not bear to sleep. She sat with her back to the wall, watching the bell sway gently in the darkness. Her ears began to notice strange details. The faint ringing of church bells from across the river, the murmuring of pigeons under the eaves, the rhythmic drip of water from the roof. Everything was sound, and yet every sound seemed to come from the same source. She closed her eyes and imagined Florence as it was centuries ago. The same river, the same air, the same fear of the night had pressing down upon sleepers. Somewhere in those endless years, other mothers must have sat like her, listening to the soft hum of a bronze bell in the dark. And then a whisper again near her ear this time. Not loud, not even distinct, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. When she opened her eyes, the candle was out. The bell was still swinging. The morning after that whisper, Maria could not shake the unease clinging to her chest. The sun came through the shutters in thin gold stripes, but it felt cold, as if the house itself were keeping a secret. Lorenzo awoke smiling faintly, rested, unaware of his mother's sleepless vigil. He asked for honey bread, spoke of a dream where a woman combed his hair beside a river. Maria froze at the mention, for she had heard once, from Lucia the midwife, that the night hag sometimes appeared as a gentle woman first, brushing the hair of a sleeping child, whispering lullabies that turn into silence. Maria forced a smile and asked, "Did she speak to you?" Lorenzo shook his head. "No, Mama, but I think she was sad." The day passed with the slow rhythm of ordinary life. Chickens pecked near the doorway. Neighbors' voices floated over the walls, and yet every small noise reminded Maria of that faint chime in the night. When dusk arrived, she decided she would not face another night without knowing more. She took her cloak and walked toward the Piazza della Signoria, where the scholars and priests often gathered near the fountain. An elderly scholar named Matteo, who had once served as a scribe in a monastery, listened carefully as she described the bronze bell. His eyes grew narrow, and he nodded. "Ah, the bells against nightmares," he murmured. "Yes, yes, I have read of them. The earliest mention comes from the 13th century, when children fell ill in their sleep and claimed a shadow sat upon them." He told her that such bells were common not only in Florence but across Europe, each one slightly different. Some etched with Latin prayers, others left plain, as if the sound alone carried sanctity. Maria asked, "Did they truly work?" Matteo smiled sadly. In those times, people believed the sound of bronze was the voice of heaven. Bells were baptized, you know. They had godparents. They were named, anointed, and considered living guardians. A small bell above a child's bed was thought to echo the larger bells of the city, calling angels to watch. She thought of the faint greenish mark upon her bell and said, "Then what if it changes color? What if it grows warm?" Matteo's expression turned distant. "There are tales," he said softly, "that some bells absorb what they protect against. A nightmare, once driven away, may leave its trace behind. Too many nights, too many dreams, and the metal begins to remember." Maria thanked him and walked home slowly through the narrow streets. The bells of the cathedral tolled in the distance, deep, resonant, alive. She thought about what Matteo had said, that bells were baptized, that they could hold memory. Could hers now hold something darker? That night, she placed the candle closer than before, watching the flame flicker on the bronze surface. Lorenzo was already asleep, breathing softly, his lashes dark against his cheeks. The bell hung motionless above him. The room smelled of wax and lavender. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, a faint vibration stirred. The bell swayed once, twice, then settled. Maria leaned forward, her hands trembling. The hum grew faintly louder, a resonance just below hearing, like the pulse of the earth itself. She whispered to the dark, "What do you want?" No answer came, only the creak of the house, the quiet stretch of silence that followed each small sound. Then, faintly, she heard it again, the whisper she could never quite make out. This time, however, it seemed to form a word. "Yuda, help." Maria's breath caught. She whispered, "Who are you?" The candle flame stretched tall, then shrank. A draft passed through the room, though the windows were closed. Lorenzo stirred but did not wake. The bell quivered once more, its metal glinting with a strange, inner light. For a long moment Maria sat frozen. Her instincts told her to flee, yet something deeper held her there. the quiet understanding that this was not a haunting but a plea. If the bell truly remembered nightmares, then perhaps it remembered the pain of those who once dreamt within its hearing. The next morning she took the bell down. It felt heavier than before, its surface faintly cool despite the warmth of the day. She examined the underside and found faint marks that had not been visible before. Tiny indentations like script, but not any she recognized. She carried it to the old scholar again. Matteo held it under the light, squinting. "These marks," he said slowly, "are not letters. They are like impressions, fingerprints almost. Bronze does not change so without reason." He placed it to his ear and smiled faintly. "It hums. Do you hear?" Maria leaned closer. A faint vibration pulsed through the metal, irregular, soft, as though something small inside were breathing. Matteo said, "Once, monks believed that every bell carried its own spirit. Not a ghost, not a demon, something born of the sound itself. Perhaps yours has begun to wake." That evening, Maria returned home uneasy yet strangely protective of the object. She hung it back above Lorenzo's bed, whispering a prayer not from the church but from her own heart, an old rhyme her mother had sung when she was a girl. "Bronze and breath, sound and sleep, guard the soul and silence keep." The room was peaceful for hours. But when the moon climbed high, the stillness broke. The bell rang once, clearer than ever before. Lorenzo's breath quickened, and Maria reached for him, shaking his shoulder. His eyes opened wide, glassy, as though he looked beyond her. He whispered, "She's here." Maria froze. "Who?" "The woman with no shadow." The bell rang again, softer this time, almost kind. Maria turned toward the sound, and for an instant, only an instant, she thought she saw a figure by the window, faint and pale, hair drifting as if underwater. The outline shimmered, then was gone. The bell stilled. Lorenzo's breathing slowed. His eyes fluttered shut once more. Maria sat beside him, too afraid to move, too calm to cry. She realized the fear that had haunted her for weeks had turned into something else. A quiet awe, the sense that she was witness to something ancient as the sound of bronze itself. When dawn came, the bell's patina gleamed soft green in the first light, and the house was utterly silent, as if resting. The morning came pale and cold, even though the season had turned mild. Maria opened the shutters, letting Florence spill in. The distant bells of the cathedral, the clatter of cart wheels on stone, the smell of bread from the baker's hearth. Yet all these familiar sounds felt thinner, like the world itself was holding its breath. She looked at the small bronze bell above Lorenzo's bed. It caught the sunlight and seemed to hum faintly, not from the breeze but from within. Lorenzo was still sleeping. His face looked calm now, peaceful even, though his hands were clenched tight on the blanket, as if holding something in a dream. Maria made her way downstairs, where Lucia, the midwife, had already arrived with a bundle of herbs. "I heard you did not sleep," Lucia said softly, arranging the leaves on the table. "The bell rings again, does it not?" Maria nodded. "Twice last night. It was clear like a real church bell. But I saw something. I think I saw her." Lucia's hands stilled. "The hag." Maria shook her head. "No, not a creature of fear. She looked like a woman who had lost her way." Lucia sat down slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "There are stories older than the church," she said. "Older than the bells. In the villages of the Apennines, they speak of the Dama di Bronzo, the Lady of Bronze. They say when the first bells were cast, they were made with both metal and a breath of human sorrow. Some smiths would forge them in silence, so the bell's first sound would not be broken by a human voice. They believed that the bell's spirit could comfort souls trapped between waking and dream. Maria listened, the words sinking deep. "Then perhaps she is not evil." Lucia smiled faintly. "Evil and sorrow are cousins, Maria. Sometimes what we fear is only what has been waiting to be heard." That night, Maria did not light a candle. She sat in darkness beside her son's bed, her fingers resting on the cool metal of the bell. The air was thick and quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat and the slow, even breathing of Lorenzo. Time passed without measure, and then, softly, the bell chimed. It was not loud, just one gentle ring that melted into the night like a sigh. But as the sound faded, Maria felt something strange. The room seemed larger, as if the air had deepened. The smell of lavender turned sharp, metallic. And she heard, faintly as though across a river, the sound of many bells ringing, each slightly out of tune, forming a trembling harmony. She closed her eyes. And then she saw. She was standing in a different room, or perhaps the same one, centuries ago. The walls were rough stone. A small boy lay sleeping, and above him hung a bell identical to hers. A woman, not unlike herself, sat beside the bed, her head bowed. The boy stirred, gasping, and the bell rang once. The woman looked up in terror, and Maria realized she was watching a memory. Not her own, but the bell's. The woman reached for her child, but her hand passed through him like smoke. The bell glowed faintly, humming louder, until the vision blurred and vanished. Maria opened her eyes to the present. The same house, the same silence. The bell swung gently above her, still warm. She pressed her hand to her chest, her pulse racing. Was it truly a vision? Or only the exhaustion of sleepless nights? The next day, she took the bell again to Matteo, the scholar. She told him everything. The woman, the sound of many bells, the feeling of being inside another time. Matteo's wrinkled hands trembled as he set the bell on his desk. "Then it remembers," he said quietly. "It is old enough, perhaps, to remember its first sorrow." He fetched a leather-bound volume and turned the pages carefully. "Here," he said, pointing to a passage written in Latin. "In the year of our Lord 1292, a craftsman named Bartolomeo della Campana wrote that bells forged in the time of plague were meant to carry breath from the dying to the living, so that night might not claim them all. Perhaps your bell was one of those." Maria felt a chill. "So it was born from grief." Matteo nodded. "And from love too. Bells were made to be heard by both worlds, ours, and the one that listens in silence." When Maria returned home, she touched the bell with new reverence. That evening, she told Lorenzo a story before bed. Not of hags or spirits, but of bells that sang to angels. He fell asleep smiling. She stayed beside him as always, waiting, listening. Hours passed. The city outside grew still. Then, from somewhere far away, perhaps from the cathedral, perhaps from nowhere at all, came the faint echo of bells, one after another, each smaller than the last. The sound rolled through the air like waves. And then hers joined them, a soft answering tone that filled the room with trembling light. The window curtains lifted though no wind blew. The air shimmered faintly. Maria whispered, "Lady of Bronze, if you are there, keep him safe." A warmth passed through her hand, the faintest tremor in the metal. And then a whisper, not of words but of comfort, like a lullaby half remembered. Maria leaned her head against the bed frame, exhaustion overtaking fear. For the first time in many nights she slept. In her dream, she walked through the streets of old Florence. The lamps burned low, the stones wet with rain. Somewhere, unseen, bells were ringing, not in alarm but in mourning, slow, beautiful, endless. And among them, she saw the Lady of Bronze, her face neither kind nor cruel, holding a small bell in her hands, watching over 1,000 sleeping children. When Maria woke, dawn was just touching the rooftops. The bell hung perfectly still, its bronze faintly glowing in the morning light. Lorenzo still slept, breathing softly. But beneath that peace, Maria felt something shift. A silence too deep to be ordinary, like the moment before a bell is struck. And she wondered if perhaps the true danger had never been the hag at all, but the silence itself. The days after that night were quiet in a way that unsettled Maria. Lorenzo slept well, the bell above his bed unmoving for hours, almost like it was resting. Yet the weight of expectation, the sense that something unseen lingered just beyond her sight, pressed upon her constantly. Each morning she would rise, lift the shutters, and feel Florence's slow rhythm. Carts rolling, church bells tolling, the river murmuring beneath the bridges. But inside a tension remained. One afternoon, she decided to visit the workshops along the Arno, seeking artisans who still worked with bronze. Perhaps if she understood the bell's making, she could understand its will. An old craftsman named Giovanni welcomed her into his cluttered shop, where hammers lay on tables, and molten bronze glimmered in small crucibles. She showed him the bell. His eyes widened. This is old," he whispered, brushing his fingers along the surface. "Not just years, but the sound remembers. You can feel it, can't you?" Maria nodded, her hand resting lightly on the bronze. She felt warmth, a faint vibration. Giovanni explained that bells cast in the 13th and 14th centuries were often made in stages. Bronze was poured in layers, hammered while still semi-molten, and sometimes infused with ashes, oils, or other substances meant to preserve memory. "Some bells," he said quietly, "carry more than sound. They carry traces of those who touched them first. A child's fear, a mother's prayer, even sorrow itself." Maria thought of the dream. The hall of bells, the woman brushing the boy's hair, the pulsing sound that vibrated through her very mind. Could the bell carry all that? Could it remember centuries of sleep, of fear, of whispered prayers? That evening she returned home. The sky pale orange, the city winding into twilight. She placed the bell above Lorenzo's bed carefully, stroking its smooth curve. He slept deeply, his small hands clutching the blanket. Hours passed. Midnight arrived with its usual hush. Maria lit a small lamp, but kept her gaze on the bell. For a long while it remained still. Then a faint vibration began. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. She leaned closer. The bronze seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then a single chime. Clear, soft, but carrying a resonance she had never heard before. It hung in the air, stretched between moments, and for a long instant, she thought she felt something brush her cheek. A cold, feather-light touch that made her heart skip. The bell swung once more, then stilled. Maria's eyes darted around the room. Shadows clung to corners, yet no movement could be seen. Lorenzo stirred in his sleep, but remained calm. She whispered, "Are you here?" The room held silence for a heartbeat. Then she heard the faintest murmur, like the rustle of silk. Not words, but intent. The bell quivered again, and she realized it was responding, not randomly, but to her presence, to her voice. Over the following nights, the pattern became clear. The bell no longer rang at regular intervals. It rang only when it sensed something. A dream, a memory, a shadow pressing too close. Maria began to note each chime, each hum in a small book. She wrote the time, the duration, even the temperature and the direction of the wind. Slowly, she saw a pattern emerge. The bell called only when it needed to, never arbitrarily, never without cause. One night, Lorenzo woke suddenly, eyes wide. "Mama," he whispered, "the woman is here." Maria rushed to his side. "Where?" she asked, fear rising. He pointed toward the corner of the room, where the shadows pooled. "She's sad," he said, voice trembling. "She wants to help me." The bell rang once, soft but clear, as though answering him. The air shifted. Maria felt a presence, gentle but insistent, brushing the edges of the room. Then, just as suddenly, it receded. The bell stopped. The shadows fell still. Lorenzo's breathing returned to calm. Maria understood. The bell did not ward away every presence. It allowed some through, guided them, contained them, ensured they did not harm. The memory of the bell, the grief it had carried, and the prayers bound to it all converged in this small, miraculous protection. But one night, Maria awoke to a different sound. Not the soft chime, not the hum, but a faint knocking from the walls themselves. Slow, deliberate 3 taps. She froze. Lorenzo slept deeply. The bell remained motionless. Yet the knocking continued. Her hands trembled as she approached the wall, listening. Then came the chime. Louder this time, insistent. The bell swung violently, catching the candlelight in flashes. Maria pressed her hands to her ears, and the knocking stopped. The bell's tone lingered in the room, vibrating in a way that made her knees weak. She realized then that the bell was not merely a charm. It was a sentinel. It did not simply repel. It warned, it guided. It drew lines between what could pass and what must wait. And tonight the warning was clear. Something had come too close. Maria sank to the floor, exhausted and trembling, the bell above her glowing faintly in the candlelight. She whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible. "Guard him, Lady of Bronze. Guard him always." As the first hint of dawn touched Florence, the bell stilled. But Maria knew the warning would return. She understood finally that the bronze charm had memory, will, and intention. It was not her fear that kept Lorenzo safe. It was the bell itself, ancient and vigilant, carrying centuries of sorrow and care, listening in the dark. And somewhere deep in the city, she felt, others had heard it too. The soft echo of a bell calling across time, across space, through the dreams of Florence's sleeping children. The following days passed with a restless rhythm. Florence itself seemed to lean toward silence, as if it held its breath for something yet to come. Maria noticed every small sound now. The scrape of a cart on stone, the distant toll of a bell across the Arno, the faint whisper of wind through alleyways. And she compared them to the bronze bell above Lorenzo's bed. Each sound felt different, smaller, almost insignificant, compared to the deep resonance of the charm. Lorenzo continued to sleep well. And yet, Maria could not shake the memory of the knocking in the walls. It had been faint, but precise, deliberate, and it had awakened something in the bell. She began to wonder whether the Lady of Bronze truly protected only her son, or if it protected more, things that she could not yet understand. One afternoon, she met Lucia near the marketplace. The midwife's face was lined, her hands rough from handling herbs and water, but her eyes were sharp. "The bell?" Lucia asked without preamble. "I have heard of it. Others have seen similar things in Tuscany. Small bronze bells over beds, etched with prayers, alive with memory." Maria nodded. "It rang for the first time without any dream. And I think it called someone or something." Lucia frowned. "Then you must be cautious. Bells such as that do not simply guard the living. They communicate. And sometimes they call what is lost, or what should remain hidden." Maria's stomach tightened. "Call what is lost?" "Yes," Lucia said, lowering her voice. "Old souls, wandering spirits, shadows that remember grief. They respond to the bronze because it remembers too. But you must understand, they are not all harmless." That night, Maria sat beside Lorenzo as always. The room smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax. She watched the bell swing slightly, as though moved by an unseen current. She whispered prayers she did not know fully, hoping they would carry through the layers of time, the centuries of sorrow bound into the bronze. Midnight passed quietly. The candle flickered. Then very softly the bell sang. Not a chime, not a knock, but a note vibrating with quiet insistence. It was a sound that seemed to fill the room, pressing lightly against her ears, her chest, the very air itself. Maria bent closer. "Who are you?" she whispered. The sound changed. Longer, more deliberate. Not words, but a presence, something alive, something that wanted acknowledgement. It pulsed in response to her breath, slow and measured, matching her heartbeat. She felt it, an echo of centuries, sorrow and care. Lorenzo stirred, murmuring softly in his sleep. "Mama, she's here," he whispered. Maria froze. "Where?" He pointed toward the far corner, where shadows gathered thickly. There she thought she saw it. The faint outline of a woman, pale, not fully solid, her hair floating as if underwater. She seemed to hover just beyond the candlelight, and the bell above Lorenzo's bed pulsed softly in response. Maria reached for her son, but the figure did not move. The bell swung gently, responding to some rhythm only it could hear. The woman's face was sorrowful, calm, almost pleading. Maria realized that the bell had not driven her away. It had drawn her in. Then the faintest whisper brushed Maria's ear, unintelligible yet unmistakable. She pressed her hand against the bronze. The warmth spread to her fingers. Through her arm, a gentle electric current that spoke without words. Morning arrived slowly. The candle had burned low, the bell hung still, and Lorenzo slept peacefully. Maria did not move immediately, afraid that even her slightest action would disturb the fragile balance. She remembered Lucia's warning. The bell communicates, it calls, it listens. It is not simply protection, it is interaction. In the days that followed, Maria became attentive to patterns she had never noticed before. The bell would move only when certain conditions aligned. A specific dream, a particular moment of fear, or perhaps a presence she could not perceive. Its movements were subtle, almost imperceptible at times, and yet she felt the effect deeply, in her chest, her limbs, and in her thoughts. One evening, the bell chimed for the first time without any clear reason. Maria had been reading quietly in the corner, Lorenzo asleep beside her. The sound filled the room softly, then stronger, a single note held long, vibrating through the wooden floor. The air thickened. The shadows stretched along the walls. And Maria knew that something had arrived. A presence beyond sight, beyond comprehension, summoned not by intention, but by the bell itself. She knelt beside the bed, her hand resting on Lorenzo's shoulder. "Lady of Bronze, protect him. Let it be safe," she whispered. The bell vibrated in answer, a tremor of metal against metal. And then the figure appeared again. The woman, pale and sorrowful, standing at the edge of the candlelight, watching. Maria did not move, did not speak further. She understood now that the bell was not merely a guardian. It was a mediator, a bridge between the living and the memory of those who linger, trapped between worlds. And tonight it had called something, or allowed something to answer its sound. As she watched, she felt a change in the air. It was heavier, expectant, like the moment before the first toll of a city bell, pregnant with purpose. The warmth from the bell spread through her hand and arm, and she felt a pulse not her own, one that seemed to come from the bronze itself, ancient and aware. Lorenzo shifted in his sleep. The figure remained. The bell chimed again, faint, precise, deliberate. And Maria understood that the night was far from over, that the Lady of Bronze was watching, guiding, and listening, and that the threshold of the room now held more than a sleeping child. It held memory, presence, and something older than Florence itself. The days that followed were weighed down with tension, though Florence outside remained serene and indifferent. Maria could sense that the bell above Lorenzo's bed had begun to remember more than just the immediate fears of a child. It seemed to carry the echoes of every soul that had ever slept beneath its chime. She noticed subtle changes. Faint green patina spreading along the bronze rim, an almost imperceptible vibration that sometimes continued long after the bell had stopped moving. Lorenzo remained asleep through it all, yet Maria's eyes stayed vigilant. She had begun to anticipate the faint hum before the bell moved, the almost imperceptible sway that meant something, or someone was approaching. Some nights she would hear a whisper, a sound too soft to comprehend, coming from the corners of the room. Sometimes it seemed to speak in syllables long forgotten, Latin words of protection or warning, or perhaps the echo of prayers whispered centuries ago. On one such night, the bell rang differently. Not a chime, not a hum, but a long, trembling note, vibrating in a way that made the air itself feel alive. Maria held her breath. The candle flickered violently, and the shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. In the far corner of the room, she saw the figure again. A woman, pale, floating, hair drifting like silk in water. This time, Maria could sense intention behind her presence. The Lady of Bronze was not merely appearing. She was communicating, waiting for Maria to understand. Maria's heart pounded as she realized that the bell was no longer just a guardian. It was a bridge. It had called forth the lady. And now Maria could interact, could perceive what the bell itself remembered. "Who are you?" Maria whispered softly, careful not to alarm Lorenzo. The figure remained silent, but the bell trembled once, a vibration deep and steady, as if acknowledging the question. Maria realized that the lady had no words, not as humans understood them. Her message came through sound, vibration, presence, and Maria's own intuition. The next morning, Maria visited Matteo, the scholar, bringing the bell with her. He examined it with the reverence of one holding a sacred relic. "It is more than a charm," he murmured. "It carries memory. It listens. It can summon those who once slept beneath its sound, and perhaps those who should have been forgotten." Maria's hands trembled as she held the bell. "Do you mean spirits?" Matteo nodded gravely. "Not all are dangerous, but all are bound to the sound. Some may seek rest, others may seek understanding. The bell is their medium. You must be careful." Returning home, Maria placed the bell above Lorenzo's bed once more, but her approach had changed. She no longer treated it solely as protection. She treated it as a vessel, a link to the unseen. She began to speak quietly to the bell, prayers and questions, and she felt subtle responses. A warmth, a pulse, a slight sway in answer. That night, the bell rang softly, then pulsed. Lorenzo murmured in his sleep, "She is here." Maria whispered, "I see her. What does she want?" The bell trembled, and for the first time Maria understood fully. The Lady of Bronze sought not to harm, but to guide, to reveal truths too subtle for the ordinary eye. She was sorrowful, carrying centuries of grief, but protective. Maria felt the weight of her presence, a gentle insistence that demanded attention, understanding, and respect. In the nights that followed, Maria's role became more defined. She learned to read the bell's movements, to sense the patterns in its vibrations. She discovered that certain dreams would cause the bell to hum longer, and that whispers from the Lady of Bronze coincided with moments of deep sleep. The bell was alive, and Maria began to trust its judgments as much as her own. One particularly still night, Maria noticed something unprecedented. A shadow formed at the foot of the bed, distinct from the candle's flicker, solid enough to cast a shape. The Lady of Bronze emerged fully in the candlelight, her presence more defined than ever, yet she did not approach. She stood at the threshold of reality and memory, observing, waiting. The bell rang in a slow, measured pattern, almost as if counting time itself. Maria's heart thumped. She realized the bell had become a recorder of sorts, chronicling centuries of sleep, fear, protection, and memory. And now, perhaps, it was attempting to teach her, to reveal secrets long buried. She whispered, "Lady, I am listening." The bell vibrated once more, a subtle but undeniable pulse, and Maria understood that some things were not revealed in words but through resonance, through intuition, through centuries of sound and silence. The lady's presence softened slightly, and the air itself seemed to grow warmer, infused with a calm that had been absent for so long. At dawn, the bell rested motionless. Lorenzo slept peacefully, and Maria allowed herself a long breath. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the bell held far more memory than she could yet comprehend, and that the Lady of Bronze had more to teach. And in the quiet of that morning, Maria sensed something lingering, an anticipation that hinted at a deeper mystery, a challenge yet to come, one that would test the limits of the bell's power, and the courage of those who slept beneath it. The days grew longer as Florence moved toward summer, but Maria's nights remained heavy with the unseen. The bell above Lorenzo's bed had taken on a presence of its own, its soft bronze surface seeming to breathe faintly in the candlelight. Maria began to notice subtle patterns, the way the bell quivered before a dream, how it hummed longer after a nightmare, and sometimes how it pulsed in response to her own whispered prayers. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the terracotta roofs, Maria noticed a faint green glow spreading along the bell's rim. She brushed her finger over it. The warmth spread through her hand, and for the first time, she felt the bell actively aware of her touch, acknowledging her presence. She whispered, "Lady of Bronze, guide him." The bell quivered softly, as if it understood, and Maria felt a calm settle over her chest. That night, Lorenzo stirred awake, whispering words she did not recognize. "She is calling me," he murmured. Maria leaned close. "Who is calling you, love?" "The lady, the one with no shadow. She wants me to follow the sound." Her heart tightened. She had seen the figure herself in the past weeks. A pale woman, sorrowful yet protective. And now, Maria realized, the bell was guiding not only protection but communication. It was teaching her son, shaping his dreams, and preparing him for something she could not yet name. She sat beside him, hand resting on the cool bronze. The bell moved faintly, a slow, deliberate sway, and then rang once, soft, pure, vibrating through the room. Lorenzo's eyes widened in sleep, his small body pressing against the blanket. Maria understood that the bell's memory was growing, expanding, recording not only dreams but intent, presence, and interaction. In the following days, she noticed subtle changes in Lorenzo. He began to speak in the mornings of dreams that seemed impossibly vivid. Streets of Florence centuries ago, people he had never met, events long past. Maria realized that the bell's memory was transferring through him, allowing him to perceive fragments of history through dreams. One afternoon, she consulted Matteo, the scholar, again. He listened intently as she recounted Lorenzo's experiences. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "The bell has become a vessel not only for protection but for memory itself. What it remembers can now pass through those who sleep beneath it. Your son is experiencing what the bell has witnessed for centuries." Maria felt a mix of awe and fear. The bell was no longer a simple charm. It was a recorder of time, an interpreter of centuries, and a guide to what had been lost. She feared what might happen if its memory became too heavy, too deep, and she wondered what price her son might pay for being its vessel. That night, she placed the candle beneath the bell, watching the bronze surface catch the flickering light. Lorenzo slept peacefully. The room was quiet, but Maria felt the weight of history pressing in. Then the bell rang, a single long note, vibrating deep and true. Shadows stretched across the room, but there was no fear. The Lady of Bronze appeared, standing at the edge of the candlelight, more solid than ever, her presence serene yet commanding. Maria whispered softly, "We are ready. Show us what we must see." The bell pulsed in response, vibrating against her hand. The lady extended her hand, a gesture not of command but of invitation. The air shimmered, and Maria felt a tug, a pull, as if the room itself had become a doorway. For an instant, she could see streets of Florence as they had been centuries ago. The same river, the same stones, the same bell towers. Children slept in small cradles, and above them hung bells identical to hers. She realized that she was witnessing the memory of countless nights, of countless fears and prayers, all recorded and preserved by the bronze. Lorenzo stirred and whispered, "I see her, the children, the bells." Maria nodded, understanding. The Lady of Bronze was teaching, guiding, showing the living the weight and protection carried by these charms. It was a history of sound and presence, a chronicle of sleep and vigilance, and now it was unfolding before them in the quiet of the night. Hours passed, and slowly the vision faded. The bell stilled. The candle burned low, and the Lady of Bronze receded to the corner of the room, still present but silent. Maria felt a deep exhaustion, yet also a profound sense of understanding. She realized that the bell had chosen her family not merely for protection but to carry its memory forward, to witness and honor the centuries it had recorded. That night, as Maria watched Lorenzo sleep, she understood fully that the bell's gift was immense but delicate. It was a vessel of memory, a guardian of souls, a teacher of dreams, and its presence demanded care, reverence, and respect. And somewhere deep within its bronze heart, the Lady of Bronze waited, patient, sorrowful, yet unyielding. Maria whispered a final prayer before sleep claimed her. "Guide us, Lady of Bronze. Keep us safe. Teach us all that we must learn." The bell pulsed softly in response, a gentle reassurance, a vibration that hummed through her body and into her mind. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth and resonance fill her completely. The nights deepened as summer settled over Florence, and Maria began to notice a change in the bell's behavior. Its resonance grew richer, deeper, as if it had absorbed more than just the protection of her child. It had begun to hum with memory, echoes of Florence centuries past, the soft cries of children, the whispered prayers of mothers long gone, and the footsteps of those who had walked its streets. Each chime carried fragments of history, vibrating softly against the walls of her modest home. Lorenzo, now more accustomed to the bell, slept through these vibrations. Yet Maria noticed subtle changes in him. His dreams had become vivid, almost lucid, filled with images of past events. Sometimes he would wake and recount a scene from long ago, a market square from the 14th century, a festival in the courtyard of a distant palace, even the quiet interior of a monastery. Maria could only marvel at how the bell had begun to transfer its memory into him, showing him Florence not as it was, but as it had been. One evening, she sought advice from Father Antonio once more. The priest, older now, listened intently as Maria described the bell's growing influence. "It is as I feared," he murmured. "The bell is no longer merely protective. It has become a vessel of memory, a conduit. You must be cautious. Such power can overwhelm even the most innocent of hearts." Maria asked softly, "What should I do?" Antonio sighed. "Observe, guide, and respect. The bell has chosen your family, but it does not belong to you. It has a will of its own, and it carries the weight of centuries. Teach your son reverence for it, and do not seek to control it. Let it reveal what it must in its own time." That night, Maria returned home with a quiet resolve. She placed the candle beneath the bell, and the familiar warmth spread through her hand as she adjusted its chain. Lorenzo slept soundly. The room was heavy with stillness, each shadow distinct in the flickering light. Then, without warning, the bell rang. Not a simple chime, but a series of notes, low and insistent, vibrating through the floorboards and into the walls. Maria felt the room itself tremble slightly, and she realized that the Lady of Bronze was present again, her figure outlined in the faint candlelight. This time the presence was closer, more defined. Maria could see her sorrow in greater detail. The soft folds of her gown, the delicate hands, the eyes that seemed to have witnessed centuries of grief. She could feel the bell's resonance linking her own heartbeat to that of the lady, creating a shared rhythm of life and memory. Lorenzo murmured in his sleep, "She is guiding me. She wants me to see." Maria understood. The bell was not merely showing memories. It was guiding experiences, teaching the young child to witness, to perceive, and to understand. Each night, the lessons grew more intricate. Lorenzo would describe long-forgotten events, recite phrases in languages he had never learned, and even respond to the lady's silent gestures with the clarity of someone who had traveled through time in his dreams. Maria realized that her role had evolved. She was no longer a passive observer. She had become a guardian of memory alongside the bell. She began keeping a journal, noting each sound, each movement, each dream. She wrote of the Lady of Bronze, of the faint patina spreading across the bell's surface, and of the faint warmth that seemed to grow as if the bell were alive. One night, as Maria watched, the bell rang sharply, a clear, insistent tone that vibrated through the room. The Lady of Bronze appeared once more, and this time she gestured toward the bell itself, her movements deliberate. Maria noticed a faint inscription along the rim, previously invisible, glowing softly in the candlelight. The characters were ancient, Latin, and something older, perhaps Etruscan. She traced them lightly with her finger, and the bell pulsed in response, warmer, alive, resonant. A voice, not her own, not Lorenzo's, but something beyond, whispered through the vibrations. "Remember, guard, watch." Maria felt a chill. This was no longer merely protection. The bell was commanding attention, reminding her of its purpose, of the centuries it had carried, and the unseen presences it governed. She realized that the Lady of Bronze had been waiting for this moment, a moment when the living could understand the depth of the bell's memory and the weight it carried. She knelt beside Lorenzo's bed, hand on the bell, whispering softly, "We hear you. We remember. We will guard." The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The Lady of Bronze remained silent, watching, and the bell pulsed gently, vibrating with life. Maria understood then that this was a pact, a bond not of fear but of mutual respect, a covenant between the living and the memory of all who had come before. And as the night deepened, the bell's resonance grew softer, calmer, vibrating like a heartbeat shared between mother, child, and ancient guardian. The Lady of Bronze faded slowly into the shadows, leaving only the faintest shimmer in the candlelight, a promise of continued guidance, protection, and the memory of centuries. Maria exhaled slowly, feeling both awe and exhaustion. She had witnessed the bell's power, its memory, and the presence it carried, and she understood that the nights ahead would continue to hold lessons. Lessons in vigilance, reverence, and the delicate balance between the living and the echoes of the past. Summer deepened in Florence, bringing with it longer days and heavy, golden evenings. Yet inside Maria's home, the nights remained shrouded in quiet vigilance. The bell above Lorenzo's bed had become a living presence, its subtle hums and chimes dictating the rhythm of their nights. Maria found herself listening not just to its sound, but to the spaces between, where memory and presence lingered. Lorenzo, growing more perceptive by the day, spoke often of dreams he could not fully explain. "Mama, I saw the market square, and the children, and bells. They were singing together," he said one morning, eyes wide, holding tightly to the blanket. Maria nodded, feeling the weight of centuries in his words. She knew the Lady of Bronze was guiding him, teaching him to perceive the echoes of history carried in the bell's metal. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, Maria prepared the room with extra care. The candle's flame was steady, the air smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, and Lorenzo was tucked in as usual. Maria watched the bell, noting the faint green patina along its rim. Its surface shimmered slightly, as if alive with anticipation. Midnight arrived, and with it, the familiar resonance. The bell trembled gently, pulsing in rhythm with Maria's heartbeat. Then it rang, a sequence of tones, long and deliberate. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, and the Lady of Bronze appeared once more, her figure fully formed in the candlelight. Maria whispered softly, "We are ready. Show us what we must see." The lady extended her hand, and the room shifted. Maria felt herself drawn forward, her senses tingling with the weight of centuries. Through the bell, through its memory, she could see Florence as it had been long ago. The cobblestones worn smooth by countless footsteps, merchants calling from stalls, children sleeping beneath small bronze bells, women tending to fires, men carrying water from the Arno. Each detail was vivid, precise, and yet infused with the soft, protective resonance of the bell. Lorenzo, in his sleep, followed the vision, moving his hands as though touching the past. "Mama, they're all safe," he murmured. "The bells, they watch over them." Maria understood. The bell did not merely protect her son. It was a guardian of memory, an anchor for the living to witness the past without altering it. Its resonance connected centuries, preserving moments that would otherwise fade, holding sorrow, joy, and vigilance in its bronze heart. The Lady of Bronze gestured toward the bell, and Maria noticed for the first time that the faint inscriptions on its rim were glowing softly. Latin letters, interwoven with symbols older than the city itself, pulsed in rhythm with the chimes. Maria traced them lightly with her finger, feeling warmth spread through her palm and up her arm. The bell responded, vibrating with a deliberate, intelligent pulse, as though acknowledging her touch. The sequence of chimes continued, and Maria realized that the bell was teaching her to listen, to perceive its memory, to understand the layers of protection and history it carried. She felt a deep connection not only to her son and the Lady of Bronze, but to all who had slept beneath such bells before. Each chime, each tremor, each vibration was a message, a lesson in vigilance and care. Hours passed, and the candle burned low. The Lady of Bronze receded slightly, her presence no less commanding, but tempered with a gentle patience. Maria felt an exhaustion unlike any she had known, yet beneath it was a profound awe. She understood that the bell had chosen her family not merely to protect, but to witness, to honor, and to preserve its memory through living guardians. As dawn began to touch the rooftops of Florence, Maria finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The bell hung still above Lorenzo's bed, its bronze surface glowing softly in the early light. Lorenzo slept peacefully, his small body rising and falling with gentle breaths. Maria reached out, resting her hand lightly on the bell, feeling warmth and quiet reassurance. She whispered softly, "Guide us, Lady of Bronze. Keep us safe. Teach us all that we must learn." The bell vibrated once more, a subtle but clear pulse, as if responding with approval. Maria closed her eyes, letting the calm of the moment fill her completely. Her heart and mind synchronized with the rhythm of the bell, with the lady, with centuries of memory and vigilance. She realized, in the quiet stillness, that the bell would continue to guide them, and that their journey with it was far from over. The Lady of Bronze would remain, patient and watchful, ready to teach, to protect, and to remind them that memory and presence are eternal. And somewhere deep within the resonance, Maria felt the faintest hint of something stirring, a presence yet unseen, a whisper beyond the lady, waiting for the bell to chime once more. The nights had become a tapestry of sound, shadow, and memory. Maria could no longer think of the bell as a simple charm. It was a living witness, a guide through centuries, carrying grief, care, and vigilance in its bronze heart. Lorenzo slept beneath it, yet even in slumber, he was no longer a passive observer. He dreamed with understanding, perceiving echoes of Florence long past, visions that the Lady of Bronze gently guided him through. One evening, the air was still, the streets outside silent except for the distant tolling of the cathedral bells. Maria sat beside her son's bed, her hand resting lightly on the bronze. The candlelight flickered, and she watched the faint shimmer along the rim, the green patina glowing softly like a heartbeat. The bell began to move, trembling at first, then swinging steadily. A single long note rang out, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, and even through Maria's chest. She felt it resonate deep in her bones, carrying something she could not yet name. The Lady of Bronze appeared, more defined than ever, her sorrowful eyes now carrying a weight of urgency. Maria realized that this was different. The bell's resonance was no longer only protective or instructive. It was a summons, calling forth something beyond their understanding. Lorenzo murmured in his sleep, "Mama, she's not alone this time. Someone else, someone waiting." Maria felt a chill, but she did not pull away. She pressed her hand firmly to the bell, letting its warmth anchor her courage. The room seemed to expand, the shadows stretching along the walls, and through them she sensed a presence, unseen, vast, patient, and aware. The bell chimed again, a sequence of tones that seemed almost like words, vibrating with intention. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, older than the city, carried through the resonance. Not a voice, but a message, urgent yet calm. The bell trembled violently, and the Lady of Bronze extended her hand toward the center of the room, beckoning Maria to trust the sound, to trust its guidance. Maria realized that the bell was about to reveal something she had never anticipated. It had carried centuries of memory, yet this was something different, something alive that had been waiting for the bell to call it forth. Her breath caught, her hand gripping the metal tightly. The warmth from the bell spread through her arm, into her chest, and for a moment, she felt the pulse of Florence itself, echoing through time. Lorenzo stirred, murmuring softly, "I hear them, the children, the bells, they're awake." Maria nodded. She understood that the Lady of Bronze had prepared him, had guided him to witness this moment safely. The room seemed to shimmer with possibilities, with presence, with histories yet unseen. The bell rang once more, long, deep, and insistent, and the shadows shifted. Somewhere in the dark, a new figure waited, indistinct, immense, and patient. Its intent was unknown, yet Maria felt no fear, only awareness, only anticipation. The Lady of Bronze stepped closer to the bell, her gaze steady and calm, and Maria felt herself drawn into a rhythm she could not resist, the resonance of bronze, shadow, and memory intertwining. She realized that the nights ahead would not be simple. The bell would continue to teach, to guide, and now, perhaps, to summon forces older than Florence itself, forces that must be understood, respected, and witnessed. She leaned closer to the bell, whispering softly, "We are ready. We trust you. Guide us." The metal pulsed violently once, then settled into a slow, deliberate vibration. Maria felt the presence of something immense, patient and aware, waiting beyond the threshold of their understanding. The Lady of Bronze stood steadfast, her eyes both sorrowful and protective, guarding the passage between what was seen and unseen. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, the bell stilled. Lorenzo slept peacefully, the candle burned low, and Maria sat quietly, her hand resting on the cool bronze. Yet she knew, deep in her chest, that this was only the beginning. The bell had called something ancient, patient, waiting, and soon the full measure of its memory and guardianship would be revealed. She exhaled slowly, letting the weight of sleep and vigilance settle over her. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "Rest, my heart. Breathe deeply. We are safe for now. The bell is here. Always here." The room remained quiet, save for the faint hum of the bell, almost imperceptible, like the heartbeat of history itself. Maria felt a soft warmth radiate through her, a reassurance that centuries of protection and memory were watching over them. And as her eyelids grew heavy, she felt the gentle pull of dreams, of histories yet to be revealed, waiting beyond the Lady of Bronze, beyond the resonance of the bell, ready to awaken with the next chime. Somewhere, unseen, the new presence stirred. Shadow moved. A whisper waited. The bell had called, and the world beyond the known was listening. And so Maria closed her eyes, taking a deep, steady breath, the bronze warmth pulsing softly through her hand, the Lady of Bronze silent but vigilant, and the promise of what was to come hanging in the delicate stillness of Florence's dawn.